After the United States stepped into Venezuela and removed the country's president, the world began debating how to define what had just happened. Donald Trump, however, appears undeterred by that debate, signaling that more action could be coming.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
What does that mean? He's not going to be doing it very long?
He's not doing it very long. He has cocaine mills and cocaine factories. He's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S. and
it sounds good to me. Yeah. You know why? Because they kill a lot of people, yeah.
Meanwhile, Trump has also suggested that U.S. pressure could extend further to countries like Mexico and Iran. China, on the other hand, has reiterated a very different view. On an earlier occasion, Beijing's top diplomat said no country should act as the world police.
我们从不认为哪一个国家可以充当国际警察，我们也不认同哪一个国家可以自诩为国际法官。各国的主权和安全都应当受到国际法的充分保护。 我们一贯反对在国际关系中使用或威胁使用武力，反对将一国的意志强加于别国。
The contrasting messages from Washington and Beijing highlight a deeper tension in today's global order and raise three important questions. If no country should act as the world police, then what happens when power is exercised without wearing a badge? When Venezuela and potentially other Chinese partners becomes a stress test of Beijing's promises, what does that mean for China's credibility, not just in Latin America, but across a wider audience? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ethan Liu. To unpack all this, I'm joined by Alexander Huang, Council on Strategic and Wargaming Studies Chairman, and Su Yanbing, National Zhengzhi University Political Science Professor. Welcome, both of you, to the show today. So, Alex, it's Venezuela, then it's Colombia, and then Iran and Mexico. How do you make of Trump's latest wave of threats? Should they be taken literally?
Well, there have been arguments about domino theory that once the Venezuela as the #1 domino down, and there will be other follows. But if we consult the national security strategy of the second Trump administration, it has clearly stated that the core interest of the United States is the United States homeland as well as the Western Hemisphere. And that's why there are headlines in U.S. newspapers talking about Monroe Doctrine. It's imminent to Monroe Doctrine. I think it's pretty clear that the United States has the capability and the capacity to remove certain figures in foreign countries, including their national leader, from their position. However, the deep-rooted relationship between Latin America and the other part of the world cannot be removed easily. So the United States needs to, after a very successful classic military operation, I think the United States needs to think about the aftermath, how to deal with the Venezuela without Maduro, and whether the opposition force can be stabilized, can be expected to rule the Venezuela toward the interest of the United States.
And when Alex mentions aftermath, I think that's where the concept of narrative comes in, right? Because you have to provide a story or a reason for your actions. I think it's more than the battle or the action on the ground, it's also a battle of words, right? So in terms of Colombia and Venezuela. So Professor Su, do you think it's also a battle over narratives, who control or who defines the story or the latest development?
Yes, absolutely. But when we just look at how China accused the United States as trying to be a world police, I think this accusation should be reconsidered. Why? Because this time the United States, the Trump administration took action not in the name of maintaining world order. Okay, so it's simply, according to their words, it's like a law enforcement operation for the United States, not for the whole world. Okay, so basically China tried to reframe the whole action, like this big power trying to be a bully and trying to think that they are a world police, but I don't think at this time the accusation is correct. And yes, I mean, who defined this action as law enforcement or intervention? It's an interplay between international organizations and also sovereign states, according to what kind of laws that they are looking at.
Speaking of that, do you think we have all the dots here, right, naming different countries? Do you think if we connect those dots, what do you think the bigger picture that Trump has in mind eventually?
Well, the bigger picture, according to their statements from Rubio and from Trump, the bigger picture here is that Trump finally tried to retake the whole Western Hemisphere after several years of inaction. Well, if we remember in the first term of Trump's administration, he actually didn't do much to intervene Latin American region, and actually he had a very bad relationship with neighboring countries in South America. Well, even now the relationship is still pretty bad, but the mode of action has been totally different.
And this debate over power and definition isn't happening at a vacuum. It's now being tested in Venezuela, a country Chinese President Xi Jinping has described as an all-weather partner.
这充分体现了中国和委内瑞拉兄弟般的友情。中国和委内瑞拉是相互信赖的好朋友，共同发展的好伙伴。我很高兴，从你一道宣布将中委关系提升为全天候战略伙伴关系。
As China's relationship with Venezuela faced its first real stress test, it's worth asking why this tie exists in the first place. The answer can be summed up with 3 letters: O-I-L. Venezuela hosts the world's largest proven oil reserves. Around 2 decades ago, Beijing began locking in access through its signature loans for oil arrangements, providing financing upfront to be repaid not in cash, but in crude. Since then, more than 80% of Venezuela's oil exports have flowed to China. Over the same period, Chinese financing has exceeded $60 billion, focused mainly on oil and gas, but also extending into infrastructure, satellite, as well as financial and legal framework that support long-term ties. So, Alex, energy, capital, and shared interests. Do you think what's between China and Venezuela is really something fraternity, or it's a very calculated, strategic point of view?
Well, fraternity is always a nice word for in diplomacy, right? But the real issue on the ground is realistic calculation of each other's strategic interests. I believe that China had spent, if not decades, but many, many years in cultivating its relationship with Venezuela. Of course, it addressed the Chinese needs for energy imports. But also, China wanted to extend its influence into Latin America. It's not only Venezuela, but it's across the board, from Brazil to Chile. So I think the recent event that taken place will be a warning shot, a big warning shot for Beijing to rethink, recalibrate, and to reframe its overseas operations in terms of getting energy, in terms of getting resources, in terms of extended its diplomatic and other influences. It can be expanded to from Latin America to the global south. So I think we will see in the foreseeable future, maybe for months, that China need to rethink its global outreach, rethink about China's strategy toward a third world country.
Okay. So as Alex has pointed out, brotherhood, fraternity sounds nice, right? And the recent event also exposed a gap between the language and the real action taking place. So Professor Su, how do other countries read that when there's like a difference between words and actions?
Well, clearly, I mean, China, recently, in the recent, years, it tries to build a pretty good relationship with the so-called global South countries, and when based among these, connections or relations, China always try to think a way to frame the connections, like its brotherhood and some, strategic partnership, etc. Well, all these good words are is rhetoric, and these countries, these global South countries, are naive. They know the difference between rhetoric and reality, and what they really care is what kind of tangible interests or benefits that they can get from China. So they actually, well, in my view, they actually don't really care about this rhetoric. This rhetoric really, China pay a lot of attention to this rhetoric because it's pretty useful for China to have a very strong framing and to position itself in the global arena, and also good rhetoric is also very useful for them for justifying their actions in several areas. But for these countries who build a relationship with China, they actually don't really care about this rhetoric.
And Beijing often presents itself as an alternative to the Western-led order for the so-called Global South, which Alex has briefly touched upon. Here, South is not about location, but about position in the global order, referring to countries on the receiving end of global power, those who have less influence over how global rules are written. It broadly spans Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, and much of Asia, with China claiming a place as well and increasingly seeking to speak. But when the unexpected event happened in Venezuela, China's promise faced its first real stress test. How China responds here, not just what it says, but what it can actually deliver when pressure mounts, is being closely watched by a much broader audience from Latin America to the wider global South. So, Professor Su, in terms of capabilities, China today looks more like the global North than the global South, right? So why does it still invest so heavily and build relationship across the regions?
Well, there should be three reasons. First, it is very important for China to have a dominant position to frame the global South narrative so that it can justify its actions that differ from the West. So it's like a necessary instrument or tool to differentiate us and other. And the second reason is about coalition building. China tried to, build this relationship with global South countries in order to gain greater negotiation or bargaining power in various international areas and also in international organizations, because when there are more friends, it implies that China might get more votes in terms of decision making. And the third reason is that building this relationship is good for China to diversify its domestic supply chain for energy, food, and critical minerals. So basically, that is why China tried to invest so heavily to build connections with global South countries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Alex, you mentioned that China needs to recalibrate its strategy, right? But is it safe to say that across the global South, those countries are also reassessing how they engage with China and recalibrating their expectations with this country?
I will look at from two different categories. Because of the announcement or the determination of the second Trump administration to address their core interest in the Western Hemisphere. So within the so-called Global South, the Latin America will be more like a focal point. Other countries other than Venezuela, I think they will have more factors to fill in, to think about, whether they want to continue to increase their collaboration with China and defy the American pressure or not. For other countries, that's probably a different story, in Africa or Southeast Asia. And China may still have an upper hand in doing with that. And that's not included in the United States national security strategy. So for China, maybe they can look into the so-called spheres of influence that in the coming years, whether the United States will reduce global presence and just focused on the Americas and giving other space for China to continue its narrative plus action, the common destiny of humankind, the expansion of the Chinese investment, a different narrative in the so-called moral high ground of the so-called the global order since the end of World War II. China is not a charity, organization. I think they will continue to calculate, to count that what kind of interest they can get. If a third world country in the global south, without resources, without the functionality that would attract Chinese investment, then you will be left out. So I think it will be more selective in the future that China trying to, extend its influence.
But when you talk about, so you talked about the domino effect earlier in the show, right? When you talk about that, it's not like, collapsing or switching sides overnight, right? You are talking about gradual.
Even we chop off a big tree, but if anyone had done that, you will know that to pick out all the roots would be much more difficult. And China has all those deep-rooted relationships that had been built in the past 20 years in Latin America, in the global south. So even we see domino effect, it probably is above the ground, but stick with the soil. And all the Chinese investment and influence cannot be removed easily.
And speaking of Chinese investments, recently there have been discussions about Chinese investments in Venezuela that have been exposed, and people are still thinking about what its aftermath will look like. And I think capital investments are one way for China to exercise or to extend its influence, right? So after this recent event in Venezuela, Professor Su, do you think maybe money or capital alone may not be enough for China to do this?
Well, probably, but I would not say that money will no longer be useless, because it's still very important. Like, for the local people, they still need this, assistance in the monetary term. I mean, to maintain their lives, right? So even though Maduro was removed, several days ago, and the normal daily life is still going on in Venezuela. So this, foreign assistance from China still, has this influence. But in the long run, of course, the dynamics will be changed. And also, China, well, like Professor Huang just said, it is very necessary and crucial for China to rethink the China's global strategy after this, events of the U.S. capturing Maduro. Yeah.
So, Alex, what's your take on this influence rooted by money or large infrastructure project? Do we still see them in the near future?
Well, if we look at Venezuela as a single out, I think the United States, as Marco Rubio had stated, that the United States does not want the oil from Venezuela. So I think they want to, control the oil, the reserve, the facilities, and they try to do business. I think as long as the oil resources or companies were controlled by the United States, they don't mind to sell it to China to make money.
Yeah.
And as the global south reassesses China, the rest of the world is debating how to define actions in Venezuela. Intervention, enforcement, or something else entirely. For smaller states, though, the focus is less on right or wrong, or moral high ground, as Alex put it, and more on credibility, which means being consistent and predictable and doing what you say you would when pressure mounts and the cost is real. So, Professor Su, for Taiwan, when we see this global South countries reassess China, do you think what lessons or what conclusions can Taiwan draw from this situation?
Well, I would see there could be some opportunity for Taiwan to explore to secure its international survival. And but the thing is that the global we have to note that the global South countries are also, recalibrating and also rethinking, what to do next. And many countries, they used to stand for China, not for the reason that they like China, because, well, the main reason is that, China almost always provide a better deal compared to the US and the EU. But right now, these countries need to rethink, what to do next, because, it seems that China, lost its credibility. But these countries also don't have a lot of options, because that doesn't mean that, they are trying to play these bargaining chips to attract U.S. attention, because the U.S. is not attracting these countries. The U.S. is doing its own way. Right, so basically, these countries are also have some having some problems right now, rethinking what to do next. And for Taiwan, in my opinion, I think that we just do what we are going to do. We keep what we are going to do right now. Is like we contribute our assistance to other countries, and we try to be a good partner in many international arenas. But at the same time, we also need to think about what kind of opportunity that we can explore to pursue a better international survival space.
So, Alex, you talked about countries in Latin America and beyond are still weighing their options, right? But for small countries, Taiwan included, maybe we don't have this luxury of choosing sites. So what do you think in this era? What are some effective risk management strategies in this era?
In a heightened bipolar, strategic competition, small states hate to be pushed to choose sides because it's not in their interest. However, they also need to, as Professor Su said, that smaller states needs to do their own cool-headed calculation. Because when commitment becomes transactional, interests become transactional. Everything can be traded. So I think there will be a lot of hedging in the coming months from the smaller states to reassess all the commitments that they got, or all the interests that they might have. And I think, smaller states will have a stronger sentiment not to be pushed to choose sides, at least for a while, because of Venezuela.
So when Alex talked about survival, I think one way to do this is to reduce uncertainty, right? That's why we talk about credibility and predictability and being consistent. So Professor Su, what do you think the strategies or mindsets that small states, small countries should have in this era of mixed messages or competing theories, or sometimes we are like in between of this great power rivalry?
Well, ideally, like Professor Huang said, ideally they can play hedging, of course. But right now, and I mean, if you look at Trump, it's I'm not sure whether the Trump administration allows these small states to play hedging. If there is no space for them to play, probably They can still think a way, but they have to play that in a very implicit way, or otherwise they can, make Trump administration very angry, right? And these are for regular or ordinary smaller states. But for Taiwan, it's a very tough question because basically, right now, there's very, very little space for Taiwan to play this hedging card.
Mm-hmm. We are not, that bad in terms of exercising our national power. So I think when big power recalibrate or readjust their strategy, Taiwan needs also to have a very cool head to reassess our interests and make ourselves policy more flexible, agile, so we can adapt to different changing world.
And our strengths as well, right, to make Taiwan indispensable.
We are very flexible.
Okay, so we have to wrap it up there. Thank you, Alex and Professor Su, for being my guests today. If you like our show, please subscribe to our channel to be notified when we upload a new video of Taiwan Talks. I'll see you next time.